And we're back. So we're continuing with example 2, and we were talking about how this shape is not a parallelogram because the top and bottom are not an equal length. And when we did that, it automatically made the right and left side not parallel to each other. And another rule of parallelograms is that both sets of opposite sides have to be parallel. Well, now if we stretch this side all the way up here and stretch this side all the way up here, they would touch each other. So that means they're not parallel anymore. Now it says classify the quadrilateral that you drew and explain why it's not a parallelogram. Well, since this one does not fit any of the rules of a parallelogram, if we flip back to our first page, the only shape that's left out and is not connected to the parallelograms is a trapezoid. And if you look, that's exactly what we ended up making. So we can say that this shape that we drew is a trapezoid because the only thing that it has, the only rule, the only attribute is that the top and bottom opposite one set of sides are parallel. Okay, so it's a trapezoid because one set of sides are parallel and it doesn't follow any of the other rules. All right, let's look at guided practice. Name one attribute that a square has that a rhombus does not have. Well, so let's look at our grid this time. And let's look at, here's our rhombus and here's our square. So they asked us one attribute that a square has that a rhombus doesn't. Well, if you look at the side rules, those are the same. So that's not a way that they are different. So let's look at their angles. They both have 4 angles. Oh, but for a rhombus, the opposite angles have to be equal. But with a square, all of the angles have to be equal. So one attribute that a square has that a rhombus does not have is, see if I can write this without being too sloppy, is that a square has to have 4 right angles. 4 right angles. So a rhombus can have 4 right angles, but it doesn't have to. Okay, so 4 right angles. Draw an example of a quadrilateral that is not a rhombus. Well, so let's talk about maybe a rectangle, right? Because one of the rules of a rhombus is that all of the sides have to be equal. So if we draw, sorry, it's kind of squiggly. If we draw a rectangle, rectangles don't have 4 equal sides. So that automatically means that a rectangle is not a rhombus. Then it says classify the quadrilateral that you drew and explain why it's not a rhombus. So we drew a rectangle. Mine's kind of wiggly looking. We drew a rectangle and we know it's not a rhombus because it doesn't have 4 equal sides. And that was one of the rules of a rhombus. Let's go ahead and look at page 861. This is your independent practice. Now, this is what a lot of your Edge Elastic assignment is going to look like. So hang with me and make sure you're understanding what we're doing. Number 3 says complete the attributes of a rhombus. So we have to think about those rules of a rhombus. Opposite sides are, we should put the word equal right here. Opposite sides have to be equal. Oh, wait, I lied. Opposite sides have to be parallel. Parallel. All right, because this side is opposite this side and they're parallel. This side is opposite this side and they're parallel. So this first blank should say parallel. Opposite sides are parallel. Then the next one says opposite angles are the blank size. So that should say same because the opposite angles of a rhombus are the same size. Next one says the figure has blank sides that are the same length. Well, all 4 sides have to be the same in a rhombus, so we would put 4 in this blank. Number 4, name 3 other quadrilaterals that all have the attributes of a parallelogram. And this is a really great question. So there are 3 other shapes that we can call a special kind of parallelogram. One would be a square, and you're going to have to pardon my sloppy writing here. I'm going to try to make it as good as possible. So a square is a parallelogram. And another kind of shape that is a parallelogram would be rectangles. So I'm going to make that short and just put rec so that it doesn't take me forever to write all these words on the screen. So a rectangle, and then a rhombus can also be called a parallelogram. So I'm just going to put rom. All of them follow the rules of parallelograms. So those 3 quadrilaterals are special kinds of parallelograms. Number 5, name another quadrilateral that has all the attributes of a rectangle. Well, that would be a square. Squares are a special kind of rectangle. They follow all the rules that a rectangle has. So even though squares have kind of their own, sorry, that cue is terrible, have their own special rules in that they have to have all sides the same, they still match all the rules of a rectangle. So a square is technically a special kind of rectangle. Number 6, draw an example of a quadrilateral that is neither a square, a rectangle, or a rhombus. Well, we could draw a parallelogram. So the top would be the same length as the bottom. They just kind of start and stop in different places. And then you connect your sides. It's kind of hard for me to do on the screen. But a parallelogram would not be a square, a rectangle, or a rhombus. You could also draw a trapezoid. A trapezoid is not going to follow any of those rules either. So you could draw a trapezoid here. Then it says, classify the quadrilateral that you drew and explain why it's not a square, a rectangle, or a rhombus. So this one is a parallelogram, and it's not a square, a rectangle, or a rhombus because it does not have right angles, so it can't be a square or a rectangle, and it's not a rhombus because it doesn't have 4 equal sides. The trapezoid is not a square because it doesn't have 4 equal sides. It's not a rectangle because it doesn't have 4 right angles. And it's not a rhombus because it doesn't have 4 equal sides. So that's how we can use those attributes to kind of prove that the shape we're drawing is the shape we want it to be. All right. I am going to stop here because this lesson has been super long. So you may go ahead and get started on your Edge Elastic assignment. And again, I would suggest either keeping open your grid that we did at the beginning of the lesson that looks like this and has all the rules on it, or keep open to this page in your math book so that you have all those rules right in front of you. Okay, that's really going to help you because it's kind of hard when you're first learning about shapes this way to remember all those rules. There's lots of them. So keep this open in front of you and use it as much as you need. And that's it for math today. I will see you all for writing.